Now, just before we take off on our talk this morning, I just want to put your minds at rest. I am not paid vast sums of money by Carnival or Cunard to put you off flying so that you'll come back and spend all your money on cruising. That would rather defeat the object of the exercise, obviously, since we all had to fly out, or many of us had to fly out to Los Angeles to pick up the ship. Now, you will, of course, all be familiar with the statistics related to the safety of airline travel. And the objective of this talk is most certainly not to frighten you. I have described it as a talk which is not for the faint-hearted, and in the past, some participants have found it disturbing. The idea of the talk is to convince you or to tell you how incredibly safe the industry is, how incredibly regulated it is. How many apparently totally unconnected and unrelated events and occurrences must take place for this accident to actually occur? Now, I compare this chain of events to what I call the Swiss cheese theory, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. A little bit of background information here. We're going to examine an accident which occurred many years ago, and I'll try to illustrate how many of these factors came into play and how they all conspired to cause the accident. You got your seatbelts fastened? Yeah. Excellent. Jolly good. Now, just before we start, I need to put this into perspective for you, and I call it the chain of command on the flight deck and parallel to that on the bridge of our beautiful ship here. Now, on this beautiful ship, we have the honor of having not only a captain, we also have a master. But this is the same person. It's Captain Rind. I love the title Master. I think that is a fantastic title, a bit like the Russell Crowe film, Master and Commander. I don't know if you remember that one. I try and get my lovely partner Lizzie to call me Master, but so far no luck. She calls me Captain when she's trying to annoy me. She says, yes, Captain, no, Captain, 3 bags full, Captain. Until relatively recently, the hierarchy on the flight deck, and I believe to a certain extent on the bridge as well, it was sometimes more of a dictatorship under the occasionally autocratic command of the captain. Now, in some cultures, this hierarchy still exists. That is when the co-pilot or the first mate may be unwilling to question the authority of the commander. There's another name for the role. So we've now got a captain, we've got a commander, we've got a master, but he is the same person. Now this hierarchy and this respect for authority is prevalent, especially in Asian cultures, where there is a great deal of respect for both age and knowledge, experience and authority. And these are revered qualities in the leader, whether he's the captain of an aircraft, a captain of the ship, a master of industry, or whatever. Now, on some long-haul flights, ultra-long-haul flights that we used to do, the longest one I did was about 14 hours and 45 minutes. But that's quite a long day. Some of our flights now are actually 18 hours when we fly from Singapore to Los Angeles or Singapore to New York non-stop. And that's about 18 hours altogether in the air. I never had the fun of doing those, I have to say, I'm pleased to say. But on these long-haul flights, we carry what is called a double crew. Now, that means that we will have 2 captains and 2 co-pilots on the flight. This is so that one crew at a time can go off to the bunks, which I showed you in the first talk, so that we can have some sleep during the flight to refresh the old body and charge the batteries again, so that we are fit for the arrival at our destination. In other words, we can go for a beer and we're not too tired when we get there. Now, there are situations where I could be the designated commander of the flight. I'm the captain and the commander. The other captain I'm flying with might be my chief pilot. But if I am designated by the company as the commander, then I am in total command of the aircraft, and the second captain is there to assist. Obviously, if something goes wrong, and I'm in the bunk, the second captain will come to me in the bunk, he'll wake me up and he'll say, I've had to shut down an engine for this reason, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue? Do you want to go back to London? Do you want to divert somewhere en route? So this is a situation, and obviously when something goes wrong, all four of us would be on the flight deck. We'd all put our heads together, and we would come up with, hopefully, what would be the best solution. Now, it's only recently that we have introduced a concept called CRM, or ARM. It stands for Crew Resource Management, or Air Crew Resource Management. And it's become a supremely important part of our training. All members of the crew on board our aircraft, that includes the cabin crew. They call us flight crew, and they are cabin crew. But together, we are air crew. And even the cabin crew, if they're encouraged to voice their concerns over anything out of the ordinary. If they hear something in the cabin, it might be a hissing sound from a door, which could mean that there's about to be a problem with the seal around that door. So we might be heading for a pressurization problem. There might be unusual vibration from somewhere. It might be from an air conditioning unit. It might only be from a fridge. Or a freezer unit. But by bringing it to our attention, we can send somebody back to have a look at it, have a listen, see what we think. Maybe there's heat coming from behind a panel. It could be hot air leaking from the air conditioning system. It might be an electrical problem which is about to manifest itself. So we encourage input from every aspect. Even passengers have come in the past and said, there seems to be something hanging off that wing there. It has happened. Don't laugh. Concorde was parked at New York one night, and a passenger noticed a hole in the top of the wing. He called the stewardess over, and he said, there's a hole in the top of the wing here. She said, oh, it's quite normal, just a vent. And he said, no, I think you should have somebody come and take a look at this. She said, no, it's all right, it's quite normal. But fortunately, he insisted. The flight engineer came back from the flight deck, looked out the window as to where the hole was, and went, oh! So if you are concerned about something, do mention it. And if you're really, really concerned and there is nothing being done about it, insist, because you could have picked up on something which has been missed. It doesn't happen all that often, I must admit, and a lot of people don't like making a fool of themselves when they actually think they found something, but there is something which is completely normal. Okay, now I'd just like you to bear these philosophies in mind, because these are all going to tie in with what we're going to examine today. I'm going to come back now to that Swiss cheese theory that I was talking about earlier on. Just bear this little image in mind as well. Don't worry about the small print on that so much. It's not that important to understand what the small print says. All I want you to look at is this sequence of events. There are the slices of Swiss cheese with all those holes all lined up, leading to a mishap, an accident, an incident, whatever it might be. All it takes is one of these slices of cheese to move slightly, and that will then block that chain of events, and the accident is being prevented. So think each time we mention a concept of this accident, just think of that and think, right, now that was the first bit of Swiss cheese there. We worked through that one, then we came through that one, that one, that one, that one. If one item, one aspect, one occurrence had not happened, the accident would not have happened. You're probably familiar with the Canary Islands, Spain's Canary Islands. They're about 250 miles off the Moroccan coast of North Africa. A very popular tourist destination, especially in the winter for Northern Europeans, North Americans as well, coming down to seek slightly warmer climes to enjoy. Now, in Tenerife, which is this island here, is mostly served nowadays by the airport in the south of the island. It's called Reina Sofia, and it is in the south part of the island, as I say. The old airport called Los Rodeos was up here in the north. Now, people sometimes get a little bit confused between the name of this place here, Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, on Gran Canaria Island, and La Palma across here, which is a separate island. That's La Palma, that's Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. So that is where the aircraft were headed for. They were headed for the airport here at Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. Now, Los Rodeos, up on the north part of the island here, is still used today, but mostly for local flights and for charter flights. But the events leading up to this accident actually started here in La Palma de Gran Canaria. It was Sunday on March 27th, 1977, many, many years ago now. And it should have been no different to any other spring day at Las Palmas Airport. 1:15 that afternoon, the passenger terminal was thrown into chaos when they received a phone call from a splinter group demanding independence for the Canary Islands. And they were told that a bomb had been placed in the airport building and that they had 10 minutes to evacuate the airport building, which they did. They managed to evacuate most of the people from the building, and the bomb exploded as scheduled, causing quite a lot of damage to the building, although no one was killed, and 8 people, I think, were seriously injured. A second bomb was rumored to have been placed in the terminal building. And having got that news, the local police had absolutely no choice but to close the airport completely. All international flights were then diverted to Tenerife's Los Rodeos airport. So they were going to go from Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, just across to the airport there. It's not far, but it's not a big airport, that's the thing. It's only a few minutes flying time away. But as a result of this totally unforeseen and totally disconnected incident, the wheels were now in motion and they were geared to lead to a catastrophe. Among the flights to be diverted was a KLM charter trip flown by one of KLM's Boeing 747s. It had left Amsterdam at 9:30 that morning, carrying 234 passengers, escaping the harsh, cold winters of Northern Europe. There were 3 babies and 48 children on board. Most were Dutch, but there were also 2 Australians, 4 Germans, and 2 Americans on the flight. In command of this flight was a captain by the name of Jacob van Zanten, who was KLM's chief training pilot for Boeing 747s. Van Zanten was an experienced pilot. He'd been flying since 1947 and been a pilot with KLM since 1951. When as a 24-year-old first officer, he'd learned on DC-3s. He now had nearly 12,000-hour experience with more than 1,500 hours flight time on the Boeing. But his job in recent years had been to train new pilots coming on to the Boeing 747 fleet. In other words, he would be in the simulator teaching them how to fly the airplane, converting from a different type. So after its 4-hour flight, they were told to divert to Tenerife, and they touched down there at about 20 minutes to 2 in the afternoon. Now, the fabled Canaries weather was not living up to its expectations today. They were greeted with the sight of low clouds, rain, and some light fog looming over the airport in the distance. Now, the apron area, together with the section of the taxiway, which I'll show you in a minute, was already occupied by other aircraft which had been instructed to divert. So, on landing, the controller directed the 747 to vacate the runway, and he then told them where they had to go and park. This is a picture of the actual 2 aircraft on the ground on the day in Tenerife. In the foreground is the KLM. He'd landed first, and the Pan Am 747 parked behind him. When the KLM, as I said, originated in Amsterdam. The Pan Am, that had originated in Los Angeles. It had then flown Los Angeles to New York, and then New York across the Atlantic to Tenerife, hopefully to Las Palmas, but finishing up in Tenerife. Now, on board were 364 passengers, and they were all Americans of a certain age, all of retirement age, who were actually going to the Canaries to join a cruise, which it was Royal Cruise Line's Golden Odyssey. I don't know if that means anything to anybody here. I don't know that particular ship. But they departed from Los Angeles the previous afternoon. As I say, they made a technical stop in New York's Kennedy Airport to pick up fuel, and a few more passengers joined the flight there as well. The aircraft was refueled, passengers got on board, and after 90 minutes on the ground, they took off. Now, that 90 minutes on the ground was supposed to be a 60-minute transit, but they got delayed, so it became 90 minutes. If they got away on schedule, they would have got into Las Palmas before the bomb went off. That would have been another slice of Swiss cheese which would have blocked off this chain of events which we see unfurling in front of us now. They were approaching Las Palmas when, again, they were told they would have to divert to Tenerife. Now, the captain of this aircraft was a gentleman by the name of Captain Victor Grubbs. He was a 57-year-old, highly experienced captain again. Now, he got the impression from the air traffic controller that he spoke to that they were expecting to reopen that airport at Las Palmas, their destination, within not a great time period. This was the impression he got, although nobody said that. He had fuel to hold. Coming across the Atlantic, we normally carry extra fuel if we're going into an island with just one runway. Carry extra fuel, it's called island reserve fuel. And he had fuel to hold for up to 2 hours. So he asked permission to enter the holding pattern above the airport. This was denied, and he was told to divert to Tenerife. If he'd been allowed to hold for 2 hours, the airport would have been open again. He would have landed as scheduled, albeit late. Another slice of Swiss cheese has failed to get into position to stop the accident. Now, Captain Van Zanten, the Dutch pilot, he elected to use his time on the ground in Tenerife to refuel his airplane. Not just for the flight back to Las Palmas, but for the next sector back to Amsterdam as well. While he was sitting on ground, he thought, right, if I get enough fuel to do that sector and then the sector back to Amsterdam, that will save time on the ground. I can get the passengers off, get the other passengers on, and go. Because also, at this stage of the game, eating into his thought processes were the flight time limitations that pilots have to live by. There's only a maximum number of duty hours that we're allowed to do before we must stand down and take rest. This is to preclude fatigue becoming a factor in any of our decision making. So the commercial pressure was there. It should not have been a commercial pressure to such a senior captain. But again, there is commercial pressure, and when you are sat with 234 passengers rather, to get off the aircraft and have to phone up the operations department in Amsterdam and say, I'm getting off with the crew now, you'll have to find 234 hotel rooms for passengers, we'll come back on duty in 10 hours or 12 hours from now. Huge commercial pressure to proceed and get on the way as quickly as they could. So this is what he did. He used his time wisely, he thought, to get the fuel on board the aircraft to save time. On board the aircraft also was the young lady who was the tour escort on board the flight, and she had arranged to meet friends in Tenerife that evening anyway. So this trip to Tenerife was quite good for her. She got into the terminal building, got on the phone to her office in Amsterdam and said, look, we're in Tenerife. All the passengers are fine, but the aircraft's diverted in here. It's going to take off and go back to Las Palmas in, an hour or so. Is it okay if I get off here in Tenerife now and go and, stick with my plans? And the company said, yeah, that's fine, as long as you're happy that the passengers are being looked after. So she got off, and that fortuitous arrangement obviously saved her life. Now, by the time that the aircraft were ready to depart, the weather had deteriorated due to a bank of thick fog had descended on the airport. You remember I mentioned that earlier? It was rolling in from the hills and from the sea. So the airport was now shrouded in this fog bank. Now, when Las Palmas Airport was then reopened to traffic, this is showing us what the layout of the airport at Tenerife. This is where the aircraft would normally park, of course, in this terminal area here. But because there were so many aircraft had diverted, the KLM was this light blue dot here, and the Pan Am who'd landed after him, that's the dark blue dot, and they are parked on this taxiway here. Now, the Pan Am was ready to go before the KLM, and as soon as they called up for a start clearance, they were given a clearance, but the captain reckoned that he probably wouldn't be able to get his jumbo past the KLM jumbo to take off from there. So the first officer and the flight engineer got out, and they actually paced the distance between the two aircraft, and they came back to the captain and said, no, you won't have room to get past there. So then they had to wait for the KLM to taxi out, and if you bear in mind that the KLM in this one is the blue, is the light blue track, and the Pan Am aircraft is on the dark blue track. This is the runway here, and this is the taxiway that they would normally use. Aircraft taxiing out for departure would go from the terminal area down this taxiway here, down there, onto the runway, and then take off. The taxiways here are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and for some reason taxiway 7. They call this parallel taxiway here and this holding area down here. Now, when the KLM were eventually called up for taxi, he was cleared to enter the runway and what we call backtrack, which is going in the opposite direction to the direction in which we're going to take off. So the idea was that he was going to backtrack and clear the runway at this intersection here onto taxiway 4 and then continue round to there and then take off. Don't forget that this taxiway was all blocked with other aircraft which had diverted, which is why they had to backtrack them in the first place, hopefully onto this taxiway, and then that would have been their actual routing. Fog. The tower up here, the controller could not see the runway. He could not see the aircraft on the runway. So it was all being done by the aircraft giving position reports. This is an aerial view of the airport. This is the control tower, as I showed you. That's the apron where they park the airplane. That's the parallel taxiway I was mentioning, and that's the main runway. And as I say, taxiways are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the KLM, when he called up for taxi and he taxied down this part of the runway, he was told to take the third taxiway to his left. Now that does not make sense because you've got taxiway 1, taxiway 2, taxiway 3, which would actually have taken him back towards the terminal building through 2 very, very sharp turns. That's a very sharp turn for a 747 there. Not one going from there to there, but also from that taxiway back onto that one. So that didn't make sense. What they think happened was the control tower thought they had heard the aircraft, and listening to it, they thought that it had passed taxiway 1. So they then said, take the third. So 1, 2, third taxiway on your left. That makes sense now. And he would then have cleared the runway then, gone there, and taken off. Pan Am would have followed him down. He would have gone the same way. However, when Pan Am came to taxi down the runway, Pan Am was unfamiliar with the layout of the airport. We've got little airport charts which enable us to see the taxiways, but when you're in fog and you're unfamiliar with the layout of the airport, it's very easy to become disorientated. You're driving along the motorway in your car, and even if you know that motorway, you cannot always see things that you recognize. You don't see that bridge which you know comes before your turn-off from the motorway. So it's very, very easy to become disorientated. The next major problem was that KLM called up for what we call airways clearance. And when we have an airways clearance, that is not a takeoff clearance. The airways clearance we get is our clearance after we take off, to climb to a certain altitude perhaps, fly a certain heading, or fly what we call a standard departure, a standard instrument departure. The airways clearance was passed to KLM when he was taxiing down the runway, and he copied that. The first officer read the air traffic control clearance back, and as far as they were concerned, they were all set to go. Pan Am was still taxiing down the runway here, and this bit here, Pan Am was about there. And this is actually showing the point of impact here. This is KLM at the end of the runway. Now, the KLM captain believed that he had received a takeoff clearance. Now, we never use the word takeoff unless we have been cleared for takeoff. If we're sitting at the end of the runway, we will call up the control tower and we'll say, we are ready for departure. Not ready for takeoff, ready for departure. The tower will then call back and say, stand by for departure, or you're cleared for takeoff. They will never, ever say, stand by for takeoff. Because when you hear the word takeoff, you think, right, that's it, I've been cleared for takeoff, fantastic, and off you go. Now, the KLM pilot thought that he had received his takeoff clearance at the same time as his airways clearance, which of course was, nothing could be further from the truth. Back to the simplified chart, just to help us picture what was going on here. When the captain thought he'd been cleared for takeoff, he then opened up the throttles to take off in this direction. The first officer and the flight engineer queried this. They said, "Captain, I'm not sure we've been cleared for takeoff." So he closed the throttles again. And by that time, he'd probably used up a little bit of the runway, not that much. But then something else happened. There were two transmissions at once. And when you get two transmissions at once, nobody can hear anybody. It may have been the control tower talking at the same time as the Pan Am. It may have been the KLM talking at the same time as the Pan Am, or the KLM talking at the same time as the tower. But all you get is this sort of screech over the radio. Nobody can hear anything. The KLM pilot, captain, again in this stage, he reckoned that he had received a takeoff clearance. And at this stage, he opened the throttles again. Deference to authority, deference to seniority, deference to rank. The first officer, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer did not query his decision to take off at this stage. I believe they had been uneasy. They had been uneasy in themselves as to what was happening, but they did not query the captain's decision. This is a computer graphic of what we believe actually happened. This was the taxiway 4, the one I mentioned before, which the Pan Am was aiming to turn off at. KLM had gone down the runway during his takeoff run. He couldn't see the aircraft coming the other way, don't forget, because of the fog. It wasn't as if he was taking off into the path of an aircraft that he could see. He could not see it. When they did see each other, the expletive that came from the KLM aircraft, I cannot repeat here, but the co-pilot of the Jumbo, of the Pan Am Jumbo, he said, "Jesus Christ, son of a bitch is coming straight at us. Get off, get off." The captain opened up the throttles to maximum power to try and get out of the way of the Jumbo, either onto this taxiway or even onto the grass. It wouldn't have mattered. Put the aircraft on the grass, but get out of the way of this thing coming the other way. Van Zanten, at this stage, he tried to rotate, as we call it, when we pull back on the control column at a certain speed. Probably in this case, it would have been about 150 knots. Quite slow because he was very light. Even with his 50 tons of fuel on board, it was still a relatively light airplane. He tried to rotate that airplane some 40 knots below that calculated speed. So what happened was the nose came up, but there was not sufficient lift being generated from the wings. The tail scraped along the runway, and eventually the aircraft was accelerating. Eventually, it did just get airborne, but unfortunately, it didn't have enough height to clear the top of the Pan Am 747. So that's the KLM just airborne, and he's just now hit the top of that Jumbo there. This computer-generated image shows how incredibly close he was to actually getting away with it, and it was just the two engines on the port side and the undercarriage which clipped the top deck of the Pan Am Jumbo. The wingtip of the KLM also would have hit the fin of the Pan Am 747, but they came so close to getting away with it, it is unbelievable. The question which comes up at this stage is, had he not picked up that extra fuel, would he have been sufficiently light to have cleared the top of the Pan Am? And the answer is, I don't know. I haven't calculated the profile, whether he would, if he'd been that much lighter, whether he would just have got away with it or not, because I'm not clever enough to calculate that sort of thing, unfortunately. But that shows how incredibly close, even right at this stage, at the last minute, just before impact, how incredibly close they were to actually getting away with that. And this shows an enlargement of the point of impact and where bits of the airplane all finished up. And this is the debris on the runway from a day later. And here you can see a couple of the taxiways in question. This is KLM, and this is the Pan Am. So it would have made no sense, as you see now, for either aircraft to have made that enormous turn that way and then that enormous turn that way, when it would have been very simple for them to have taken that one, down that taxiway, down to the end, turned round and come off. And don't forget that this taxiway here, that was occupied by other aircraft which had diverted and were blocking it, which gave the controllers quite a difficult job to do, to try and keep the aircraft going the right way. There were no survivors on the KLM. There were some survivors on the Pan Am, but unfortunately, there were, I think, 61 out of about 317 survived. So, when we come to the accident investigation itself and the Swiss cheese analogy, the terrorist bomb, was that the cause of the accident? To my mind, yes. Had it not been for the terrorist bomb, nothing else would have happened to conspire to cause this accident. If the Pan Am captain had been allowed to hold overhead for his 2 hours, use up his 2 hours of holding fuel instead of being told to divert, would that have stopped the accident? Almost certainly. KLM's decision to refuel, if he hadn't refueled, would he have been light enough just to have dragged that airplane over the top of the Pan Am? The parking restrictions at the diversion airport, if they'd had more room, then the Pan Am could have got past and he would have taken off before the KLM was ready. The accident would never have happened. The reducing visibility, the weather conspiring against them, their uncertainty of position, unfamiliarity with the airport, not being able to identify exactly where they were in relation to the taxiways on the airport, poor communication between the air traffic controllers and the two aircraft on the ground. So why had Captain Van Zanten commenced takeoff without ATC clearance to do so? Why had Captain Grubbs been instructed to take a taxiway which would have taken him back towards the terminal? Why did the KLM crew not grasp the significance of the fact that the Pan Am aircraft might still have been on the runway? We pilots, after a while, we get a gut feeling, it's called. I won't tell you which part of your body twitches when you're not happy with something, but you probably sort of get the message. So poor old Van Zanten was held solely responsible for the accident, which at the end of the day he was. The captain is the man who is going to carry the can when things go wrong. That's what they pay him for. That's what he has to accept, that responsibility. He should have delayed his takeoff until he was 100% positive that everything is safe for him to do so. And it's so easy for me, for anybody, to sit here and be wise in retrospect. When you think of the pressures on him, as I mentioned earlier, the commercial pressure to get that aircraft from A to B, everything was conspiring. This was a day of absolute conspiracy. There are memorials to the passengers both in Amsterdam, in the Vondelpark, I think it is, and at Tenerife. So, this is never going to happen to you, I can assure you. But if it ever does, and if you are in a situation, in an environment, when things are going badly wrong for you, if we had a fire on board the ship tonight, for example, remember we were woken up the other night by the assessment party going to investigate something that could have been a fire. We could all have been in a situation where our lives were potentially at risk. If you're staying in a hotel and you smell smoke or you can see flames coming from a part of the hotel, an earthquake, God forbid, a gas explosion in your own home or near your home, if you're in a road accident, or God forbid, a terrorist incident, a terrorist attack in an enclosed area. This is what you can possibly do to try and improve your chances of survival. Like the 155 passengers on board US Airways Flight 1549 when Captain Sully Sullenberger landed his Airbus in the Hudson River. A combination of luck, superlative flying skills, and excellent training. This is what you get if you travel first class. You get a nice little boat. And first class passengers don't even get their feet wet. Those in economy have to stand on the wing and get their socks wet and wait till somebody comes along in a boat to actually rescue them. As I say, through sheer skill, luck, everything else, everybody walked away from that incredible accident. So what do you think your chances of survival are if you're involved in an aeroplane accident? 20%, 30%, 40, 50, 60? It's actually about 90%. I think the US government did a survey a few years ago. Between 1993 and 2000, there were 568 airplane crashes of various airplane types in the USA, involving some 53,000 passengers and crew. And of these, 51,000 survived. That's over 90% actually survived, which is an amazing statistic, I think. I hate statistics anyway, but I don't know if you remember our wonderful comedian by the name of Dave Allen. Do you remember Dave Allen? He was absolutely fantastic. He was doing his thoughts on statistics one night, and he said, do you know now, he said, in the road traffic accidents, there's something like 30% of accidents where alcohol is involved. He said, that is a disgusting statistic, that. He said, that means that 70% of the accidents are caused by them sober people. You should keep them sober people off the road and just let us drunks get on with it. Your lifesavers to try and get you out of a dangerous situation. Now, it's an imprecise science with heavy claim and counterclaim as to what is going to benefit you and what is rendered useless in certain circumstances. But there are some areas where we have general agreement. The first thing is to have a plan. Always have a plan in your mind as to what you're going to do if. When you're trundling along the runway at night, you think, right, if we have an emergency now, what am I going to do? I'm assuming, of course, that you are going to have listened to the safety briefing, and if you haven't, then smack your own wrists. Thank you. You may or may not get any warning as well. It may be a sudden impact, almost exactly the same as Sully Sullenberger. He had 3 minutes, and the only thing he could say to the passengers was, prepare for impact. And that was it. That was the emergency briefing. So if you know what the emergency position is, that's fine. You can brace for impact. If that's the time, you've got to start looking at your card and think, brace for impact, what does that mean? That's cutting it a little bit fine, I think. Now, the safest seats. Boeing will tell you that any seat is as safe as any other seat, front, middle, or back. And again, it depends on the accident as to what is going to be safe or not safe. People would say that the best place to sit is near where they keep the flight recorder, because that's the bit they expect to find intact. Should we have rear-facing seats in airplanes? Should we sit facing backwards? Yes, we should. It's much, much safer. That way, in a deceleration, your entire back, your head will be supported against the back of the seat. Why don't we have rear-facing seats? Because you don't like it. Passengers don't like facing backwards. They have them on military transports. And the other thing, of course, is by sitting at the back of the aircraft, no aircraft has ever reversed into a mountain. Back to the brace, brace, brace position again. People, conspiracy theorists, will tell you that the brace position is simply to ensure that your neck and spine will snap cleanly so that you can't sue the insurance companies otherwise. Others, less ludicrously, point out that one of the two recommended brace positions, in other words, with your hand over your back of your head like that and bent forward, or with your hands down on your legs holding on, you can't do that in an economy seat if you're more than about 5'10" anyway. Anyway, what you're trying to do is to stop yourself from the jackknife effect at impact. So you try and get yourself from flying forward and hitting the seat in front of you or other parts of the aircraft interior, and preventing injuries to your legs and ankles that will hinder your escape, because if your legs fly forward into the frame of the seat in front of you, it's almost certainly going to break your shin bone, and then you're going to have great difficulty in getting out of the airplane. Protection, protection, protection. If you can, try and grab a cushion of some sort or a pillow to put in front of your face just before impact. And as I say, keep your feet flat on the floor with your feet as far back as you can. And that way, then your legs may not fly forward so much. Now, seatbelts, of course, they show you how to fasten and unfasten your seatbelts, don't they? And you think, well, that's not exactly rocket science, But the trouble is, you see, when you are given information on something that you don't know about, you can have a short-term memory. So when the stewardess is giving you the briefing on the seatbelt, this goes into what's called the prefrontal cortex, and this is where you store short-term memory. If I'm introduced to you and you introduce yourself to me as Bob, I'll probably remember you as Bob for, I don't know, today, tomorrow maybe, but in 2 weeks' time, if we meet again, I might not remember your name because it hasn't been transferred into the long-term memory, a bit like RAM and the hard drive on your computer. So if you listen to the briefing, you will know, your brain will be reinforced as to how you open your seatbelt. Because if you don't listen to this information, in an emergency situation, you're going to be feeling for that button like you've got on your car, and you won't be able to find it. And this will confuse you even more. It will lead to panic. You never think to lift the flap on the seatbelt when your brain has been scrambled by shock. Trust me, it's absolutely true, this. As for the belt itself, pull it as tight as you can. For every inch of slack, you're increasing the possibility of damage to your internal organs. The negative panic. People can sometimes sit there waiting for instructions, which may or may not come either from the flight deck or from the cabin crew. It's a very difficult thing to do this. Do not sit there waiting for something. You may have to take the situation into your own hands. Now, smoke inhalation is probably the biggest killer. Fire is one, but smoke inhalation, a couple of lungfuls of toxic smoke or fumes, and you can lose consciousness very, very quickly. Get a handkerchief over your mouth and nose. If you can, if you get some water on it, that's absolutely fine, or use that little head, that seat cover on the top of the seat behind you there. Use that with some water on it. That will filter out some of the toxicity. If there's no water available, use urine. We're talking life and death here. This is no time to be fastidious. If you're wondering about the availability of urine, trust me, they'll almost certainly. almost. There will be plenty. Do you get to the floor to follow the little green lights? To my mind, probably not. I think this is wrong information, but that's just my opinion. The chances are you'll simply be trampled, crushed, or suffocated under luggage, falling bodies, or the rush of other passengers. Keep your head down, yes, and mouth and nose covered, but stay on 2 feet and climb over the seat backs if necessary. Don't always think you've got to go up the aisle. Just get your feet on the furniture. Nobody's going to send you the bill. Keep your hands free. Don't even think about trying to take anything with you at all. You cannot carry your briefcase and keep your balance going over the back of those seats. Just let everything go. Your golden period is going to last between 1 minute and 2 minutes on board an aircraft if it's on fire on the ground. That is the time to get to an exit fast. Check that it's viable inside and out, and get the hell out of it. Get down that slide as fast as you possibly can. Do you stop to help others? Do you stop to, if you're traveling with your wife or family? My advice is that if you're traveling with another adult, you say, I will see you in the terminal building. If you're traveling with a child or children, one person will be responsible for that child to the best of their ability. You must not go back into the aircraft if you do not see your loved ones or your child outside the aircraft. You will only lose your own life in that situation. We never know what we're going to do in extremis. And again, always try and pretend to listen to the cabin crew. It makes the cabin crew feel good anyway. And I'd be very upset if you all sat there reading your newspapers when I'm talking to you. I'm sure you'd be very upset if you were doing a presentation. People sat there reading their newspapers. Don't follow the bubbles if you're in water, because they may just lead up to the top of the cabin. And once you get to the top of the cabin, you ain't going anywhere else. You're not going to get back down again. So don't follow the bubbles unless you know you are definitely outside the aircraft. Your IQ will drop. You'll find you can't rationalize. You'll struggle with the basic tasks, trust me. There is key survival-based knowledge that cannot be gained except by living through an emergency. And I have been taught by people when we do our safety and emergency procedures by people who have lived through real-life horror of either crashes or ditching. And the big question, as I say, is do you get your friends and colleagues out, or do you make every man for himself? If ever you hear a message from the pilot saying, will the senior cabin attendant report to the flight deck immediately? Have a look at the stewardesses. If they look worried and pull the trolleys back, it means that one of the flight crew is incapacitated, and they might have a problem. If that is then followed up by the announcement, is there anyone on board who knows how to fly a plane? Then you'll know that both I and the co-pilot have eaten the same past its sell-by date fish, which we don't, by the way. In this case, you'll have to step up to the plate. You'll have to prove to us that you really are an ace on your Microsoft flight sim. I was talking to a young man just before the show, and we decided that, yes, he probably could land the airplane with the knowledge from his Microsoft flight sim if he's happy to program it so the aircraft will do an automatic landing. And that is absolutely right. They are so accurate, these simulators, that they really are. That you could, if you could land it on your computer at home, you could probably press the right buttons, talking to a qualified pilot on the ground who will tell you what to do and when. You probably could actually get away with it. That's my feeling. Try and land it manually and be a real hero, you're going to kill everybody. Trust me on that one. It reminds me of that wonderful old film Airplane, which I was going to show you a bit from. If we've got time at the next talk, I'll try and fit that one in. But unfortunately, I have, again, overshot, so I'll be in terrible trouble. I hope you found that of some interest. I hope I didn't frighten you too much. It certainly was not the idea of the talk to frighten you. And just to really get you in the mood for the next talk, the next one, we're going to talk about terrorism. And how we can hopefully try and keep ahead of the terrorist. Once again, thank you ever so much for coming in. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.